thank you for joining us. The Silver City Museum is supported in part by the Silver City Museum Society, which is a nonprofit. If you get a chance and are able to, please donate at www.silvercitymuseum.org/virtual-tip-jar. That helps us be able to continue doing programs like this free to the public. And if you can, every little bit counts. So really appreciate that. And let's see. So this is the fourth of our series. And I did mention that we are partnered with Will. And so here is Mr. Alan Reagans, and he will tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, just really quickly before we get to Dr. Scott here is, so the Western Institute for Lifelong Learning, I suspect many of you are familiar with us and hopefully a lot of you are members, is very pleased to be co-hosting, co-sponsoring, providing a little bit of low-tech technical assistance to the museum on this series of programs through the summer. As a relative newcomer, I really am getting what I expected, a crash course in Silver City history and culture, and really helps me to understand the community much better than I did before. So I encourage you to look at either our website, which is www.will.community, or the museum website. You can register for the future upcoming programs. There's also information on the Will website about upcoming courses for members and other activities and programs, including we're planning to get back to real in-person lunch and learn programs starting up in the fall, about half of which will be partnered with the museum again. So we're really pleased to be doing these joint activities. Again, if you got any questions, thoughts, I'll put both the web link and an email to contact us with any semi-polite suggestions as to what we could do moving forward in the future. All right. Thanks, Erin. Back to you.
Thank you. And before I forget, and before we move on, I just want to also thank New Mexico Humanities Council for underwriting this series in part. And let's get started. I would like to introduce our 4 out of 5 out of 6 of the total 7 scholars that will be here for moral support and for a little backup help and conversation. Going the whole thing. And later we will be joined by Mr. Chavira from the Chamber of Commerce. Lee Gruber, he is here to join us as well. And Mr. George Carr. There you are, George. Hi. Dr. Scott Fritz is one of our 7 scholars his focus is on the economy in Southwest New Mexico for this talk. He has a PhD in American history with a focus on history and merchant capitalism in Southwest New Mexico, in the Southwest, which makes him very, very, very knowledgeable on this topic and a perfect person to give this presentation. He is a professor of history at Western New Mexico University in Silver City and was awarded a Master's of Arts in History from NMSU in 1997. And yeah, I think there's plenty more that can be said, but I think it is better that he say it himself if he so chooses. Here is Dr. Scott Fritz.
Well, hello to you all. I'm so glad that I'm in your presence and vice versa. That's true. I've always been interested in the history of merchant capitalism. I'm now more interested in the history of small business in the early 20th century here in New Mexico. But for this morning's presentation, we'll just be looking at the overall history of business here in Grant County from the late 19th century and into the early 20th century. And we will be looking at both small and large businesses. So without further ado, I'm going to have my tech assistant make my PowerPoint available for view, and we will begin. So Stephen, thank you very much. So one moment, we will begin with my presentation.
I think that's it.
That's it, yeah. So as you can see, I'm going to let you think about the title, Booms and Busts, 1870 to 1952, the history of business in Silver City, New Mexico. And you might be able to move my icon, which you see me lecturing, so that in certain slides, it won't be in front of a word or a photo. So let me begin by discussing what sustained this early historical economy that I will begin to talk about. And what the answer is to that question is the exportation of commodities. That is what sustained this economy. That is through the exportation of gold, silver, and copper, and the sale of those precious metals back east, money came into this region. And the same thing too with ranching, the sale of cattle, both back east as well as in California, made profits for ranchers that helped to sustain an economy here in southwestern New Mexico. But keep in mind, historically, and perhaps even to this day, we are existing, or we did exist historically, in a very volatile market condition, where when we had a rise in commodity prices, like a rise in the price of gold or copper, there's a boom that will be experienced. A rise in cattle prices, there will be a boom. And then when there's a collapse in those prices, there will be a bust. So I think for some reason, we can say that all throughout the American West, you have a cycle of boom and bust, because in the American West, you have a region dependent on commodity production, extraction, and that was found here in Grant County as well. Other sources of income that I think will help to explain why Silver City never became a ghost town, like a lot of these mining towns in the American West had suffered from, was because of government spending. Think about Fort Baird, that was established in 1866 to protect miners from Apache raids and to provide territorial defense. Government spending to maintain that fort trickled into the economy. And by the beginning of the 20th century, we have a burgeoning healthcare industry, largely based on the treatment of tuberculosis patients. That's going to bring money into this economy that will help to sustain Silver City's business community. So now let's start thinking about what were some of the early businesses that were established as early as the beginning of the 1800s. And that's going to be some of the first mines that were established by the Spanish. We have to always remember the Hispanic population played a big role in the economic history of this region. And it begins with one Jose Carrasco. He was a Spanish officer who befriended some Apache. And those Apache led him or guided him up into this area in the year of 1799, showing to him where valuable deposits of copper could be literally picked up off the ground. Jose Carrasco filed a claim with the Spanish government. He mined those claims for a very short period of time before he sold his claims to a wealthy merchant from Chihuahua. Chihuahua is a city that would be located approximately 500 miles to the southeast of the future town of Silver City. His name was Manuel El Huella, and he would start to develop those mines in 1803. We're talking about the Santa Rita del Cobre mines, which today is the Chino mine that we all associate the big pit as having. And Manuel El Huella would begin to construct the first beginnings of a Spanish fort. And you can see a photo of that on the left. Gold mining was another early economic activity. We think that gold mining occurred in the Pinos Altos Mountains, which are located approximately 9 miles north of today's Silver City, by Mexican miners in the 1820s and 1830s in an area of the Pinos Altos Mountains called San Domingo Creek. However, mining never really developed there until a series of Anglo prospectors associated with the Walker Party discovered gold for themselves at the confluence of Cherry and Bear Creeks. But there was still problems with the Apache that kept mining minimal. You had this civil war that broke out. If you know New Mexico history, you know that the Confederacy invaded the territory. It would not be until after the Civil War that we begin to see a boom in gold mining occur, particularly following the establishment of the Pinos Altos Mining Company in 1866 that was established by 4 merchants, 2 of whom were based in the Mesilla Valley. Silver mining would begin as well in this period of time, actually in the year of 1870. So now I want you to be thinking this. Where was the first discovery of silver? Where was it actually to occur? Silver City wasn't Silver City until the early 1870s. It wasn't called as such. In fact, where Silver City would develop was a site that the Spanish and the Mexican population called La Ciénaga de San Vicente, which in English means the marsh of St. Vincent, through which a creek flowed that would be called San Vicente Creek. And by the late 1860s, farming developed along that creek to meet the demand for food on the part of miners up in the Pinos Altos Mountains. That is, mining created a demand for farming. And that helps to explain why 2 men, they were brothers, John and James Bullard from Missouri, will arrive to the Ciénaga to engage in farming to sell food to the miners for gold. John and James Bullard, they're really important. Keep in mind, you have Bullard Street. It's named after these brothers. Keep in mind too the name John, because John Bullard will realize something about the possibility that silver ore could be found nearby. That is, one day, as everyone in the marsh, in the Ciénaga were farming, they heard news of a recent discovery of silver, not nearby, but about 60 miles to the south in what later would be called the Pyramid Mountains, which are located south of today's Lordsburg. That discovery of silver encouraged John Bullard and other of these farmers to travel south to investigate the recent discovery of silver. And it's said that John Bullard noted, quote, "If this is silver ore in the Pyramid Mountains, I know where a lot more of this is to the north. That is, underneath what today we call Boston Hill, which back in this period of time was called the Legal Tender Hill, named after the claim, the silver mining claim that John Bullard himself had filed." So if you've ever imagined, or if you've ever walked behind the old courthouse and you notice that it looks like a cliff that's been cut out, that was where the first discovery of silver occurred here locally. But really the first discovery of silver in the area occurred south near what today is Lordsburg. 2 mining districts would quickly develop. Think about all those miners up in Pinos Altos. When they heard of the silver discovery at the underneath Boston Hill, or underneath the Legal Tender Hill, they flocked and they filed their claims, resulting in 2 mining districts to be established. The Silver Flat Mining District that would encompass what today is Boston Hill, and the Chloride Flat Mining District, which would be located about 1 mile further to the west. Silver City would then emerge. It would emerge first as a mining camp, then as the county seat for Grant County, and it then would become the commercial center of Grant County. What were some of the first businesses to be opened? Well, we can say first, smelting and mineral processing. Companies that were established to process mineral ores was what was the, well, what would I say? What were some of the early businesses to be established? Actually, some of the first smelters were owned by Hispanic miners, Mexican miners from Mexico, including a son and father by the name of Juan and Lorenzo Carrasco. They were from Chihuahua. They had great experience working the silver mines of that region of Mexico. They filed some of the best claims in the Chloride Flats district. And of course, they would build smelters. Smelters at the end of Bullard, at the southern end of town, at the base of Chihuahua Hill. That is, these were small, rather crude, adobe-made smelters, but they made a considerable amount of money, both mining and smelting silver ore. And it said that they made up to $200,000 before they left. Anglos would quickly introduce new modern means or ways of processing mineral ores with the use of stamp mills. Stamp mills were these steam-powered devices that would literally use stamps to crush the larger ore into smaller particles. And you can see on the right what these stamp mills look like. You can see the stamps. After the rock was crushed, water would be used to sort of move that ore across mercury-covered plates. Mercury then would pull that metal out of the rock. So the need for steam power to move these stamps was always a necessity. And it helps to explain why very quickly a lot of the forests and the trees surrounding this area were denuded. And that, of course, would have an environmental impact decades later, vis-a-vis the flood of 1895 and the flood of 1902. One of the first Anglos to start or to establish one of these stamp mills would be a guy from New York by the name of Martin Bremen, who had arrived to New Mexico, had homesteaded in Pinos Altos. He bought a stamp mill in Pinos Altos and he relocated it to Silver City, next to San Vicente Creek. And his company was called the Bremen Mining and Milling Company. More Anglos would establish stamp mills, but the one that you want to keep in mind is the Silver City Reduction Works. It was established in 1884 by a Florida real estate investor by the name of Henry Flagler, as well as other local investors. And you can see a photo of it on the bottom right. This was a large operation that was acquired by the Hearst estate. If you're familiar with Hearst Castle in California, Philip Randolph Hearst was the famous newspaper magnate. George Hearst was his father. Well, the Hearst estate purchased the Silver City Reduction Works, which they then will sell to a new company called the Comanche Mining and Smelting Company. And they're important because in 1906, when the Comanche Mining and Smelting Company takes over ownership of the Silver City Reduction Works, they will build a railroad that would connect their reduction plant, their smelter, to their different mines in the area, including their mines up in Pinos Altos. And in that photo, you can see how the railroad tracks led right into their smelter yard. Businesses in Silver City quickly developed. And these were businesses that were largely based on the institution of merchant capitalism. Merchant capitalism was an economic system dominated by general merchants who participated in a barter economy. They sold manufactured goods on credit in exchange for raw commodities, including farm products, hay, corn, beans. But here in Silver City, the most important of those commodities were mineral products, gold, silver, and copper. And what these merchants did was then they liquidated debts, their customers' debts, by finding markets for these products. A lot of the food that they got was sold to miners. They were also, the food was also sold to the United States military, not just at Fort Baird, but in other forts in the region. Now, in terms of gold, silver, and copper, these merchants sold those back east, those products back east. Gold and silver was sold to the United States Treasury for the purposes of minting our coins, our money supply. And copper was largely sold to Eastern industrialists for the purposes of manufacturing. Now, I think I'm the only one that has argued, and maybe the scholars here in the room with me might realize, or maybe you don't agree with me, that merchants from the Mesilla Valley dominated this economy in the 1870s. And the reason was because these merchants in the Mesilla Valley, they already had wagons that were connecting their region in southern New Mexico with the railroad terminus up in Colorado. That is, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad is building the Transcontinental Railroad towards New Mexico, and they are running wagons up to the terminus. And it was only natural that they could then run wagons into Grant County after the first discovery of gold and silver. And also, these merchants want access to metal, precious metal, because it's a highly liquid asset that can help them to liquidate their debts quite easily. So let me just give you two examples. Henry Lazinski was the largest merchant in all of southern New Mexico during the 1870s and perhaps even into the 1880s. Henry Lazinski went into business here in Silver City with Joseph Bennett and his brother Cornelius. Henry Lazinski stayed in Las Cruces for the most part to operate the Las Cruces store because that was the base. That's where his business was based in. Joseph Bennett ran the store here. Now, if you look on the left, you can see a photo of the old Bennett Brothers store. It was located on the northeast corner of Broadway and Hudson Street. And that's where today's Snappy Mart is located. Just imagine yourself going over there. That was where the old Bennett Brothers store was. I want to emphasize Martin Amador. Martin Amador, he was a Hispano merchant, not as affluent as Henry Lazinski, but nevertheless important. If you've ever been to Las Cruces, you probably have driven on Amador Street, named after this merchant, this Hispanic merchant. He goes into business with one Jose Macias. He was a Mexican merchant. He served with Maximilian during the French intervention in the 1860s. They opened up a store here in Silver City. For the most part, Martin Amador stayed in Las Cruces, and Jose Macias ran the store here in Silver City. The dominance of the merchants of the Mesilla Valley here in Silver City probably basically came to an end when the railroad arrives in the 1880s. Historians of New Mexico will oftentimes emphasize the role that the Jews played in commerce. And I think Tom Hester's presentation that will be delivered here later this month on the history of the cultural diversity of Grant County might touch upon the history of the Jews here in Silver City. Jewish merchants played a big role in essentially initiating a commercial revolution, as one historian by the name of William Parrish has argued. Some of the first merchants in Silver City were of Jewish descent, including Eugene Golding and, look at the name, Henry Lazinski. These individuals had connections with Eastern wholesalers and bankers that allowed them the capital they needed to buy manufactured goods in bulk. And they also had connections with the government that allowed them to sell precious metals easily to the United States Treasury, but also their connections with the government allowed them to win lucrative military contracts to supply food to nearby military installations. But there's one Jewish merchant that I want to highlight because he would build a store in which today's Little Toad Brewery is located in. And that man is Isaac Cohen. He was born in Jerusalem in the year of 1842, which in this period of time was part of the larger nation of Syria. He emigrated to the United States. He fought in the Civil War. He comes out west, and what does he do? He clerks for Henry Lisinski in his store in Las Cruces. And then he must have learned about the possibilities of himself opening up a store in Silver City. Or he might have been encouraged by Henry Lisinski to open up a store, because this is what he does. He opens up a store in Silver City in 1872. And look at this advertisement that I found on the right. It's a little blurry, but this is an advertisement from 1873, Ian Cohen's store in Silver City, and it says that his partner is Morris Lisinski. So I think Morris was the younger brother of Henry Lisinski, if I'm correct. Again, the influence of the merchants of the Mesilla Valley vis-a-vis the Lisinski family, it just has to be emphasized repeatedly in this period of the 1870s. Ultimately, he will build the Cohen building that we know of today, and you can see a photo of it there on the screen, in the year of 1881. And Isaac Cohen would be responsible, well, he would be partly responsible for bringing the railroad to Silver City in 1883. So keep that in mind. The railroad comes to Silver City in 1883. These merchants extended credit into the economy, usually through the sale of manufactured goods on credit, but they're also bankers. And so it was very natural for some of these general merchants to go into banking full time. I'll give you one example. This guy's name was C.P. Crawford. C.P. Crawford, he was a merchant who eventually goes into banking, but he goes bankrupt in the year of 1883. But there's one bank that I want to emphasize, and that's going to be the Bank of Meredith and Ailman and Company. And the reason why I emphasize this is because the Silver City Museum is housed in the old Ailman home. And also, Henry Ailman would write this autobiography, so we know a lot about this company. These two men, Hartford Meredith and Henry Ailman, they came out to New Mexico as miners, like a lot of these businessmen did, I noticed. They met in Georgetown, which was a silver mining camp that was established in the early 1870s, about 20 miles to the northeast of Silver City. And they will develop their Queen Nayad mine. Now, keep this in mind. The Queen Nayad mine was a very profitable endeavor. They discovered a very valuable vein of silver ore, and they hired employees to mine that vein. The wife of Henry Ailman, her name was Theora Virginia Ailman. She was responsible for the daily operations of that mine. And this is something we have to keep in mind. You have businessmen who own these businesses, but who's doing the day-to-day operations? It's usually the wives. And so this is a great example. And Theora Virginia Ailman talks about this in her own memoirs, as well as Henry Ailman in his memoirs. They sell the mine in 1880. They will buy a store in that year from another one of these merchants from the Mesilla Valley, Joseph Reynolds. He was a member of the firm Reynolds and Griggs. And they only operate the store for 3 years. And then they sell the store to another merchant by the name of Max Schutz in 1883. And that's when they go into banking full time. Of course, they're loaning money to miners, they're loaning money to ranchers during a very good time to be in business. The Depression of the 1870s, which impacted all the United States as well as Western Europe. The Depression of the 1870s is over. You have a federal law called the Bland-Allison Act, which required the federal government to purchase between 2 and 4 million ounces of silver per month. That helped to stabilize silver prices. When you look at the graph of silver prices in the late 19th century, you just see a drop in the value of silver throughout the whole period. But the Bland-Allison Act helped to stabilize silver prices for the short term. And there's this boom in cattle ranching in the 1880s that has to be mentioned. until the famous drought of 1886 to 1887 that just plagued the entire American West. Theodore Roosevelt's 2 ranches in South Dakota went belly up in that drought of 1886 to 1887. A lot of our ranches went bankrupt. And the effect of the Bland-Allison Act was short-lived, resulting in Meredith and Ailman having overextended themselves in their loans, their customers not being able to pay back their loans, and of course they went bankrupt in 1887. My interpretation is that Ailman and Meredith, they were minors. I think they got a little over their head by going into banking, and they suffered as a result. What about other businesses in Silver City? Well, there's so many to talk about. Let me just give you some quick examples. A lot of these general merchants specialized in the sale of products for miners, like Bennett Brothers and Company. Look at that advertisement I found yesterday. Bennett Brothers and Company, they specialize in miners' outfits. That would be like picks, pans, powder, and fuses. For dynamite, you got to blow up the rocks. Silver City would be the center of distribution. And at the southern end of town, at the base of Chihuahua Hill, there was usually a lot of corrals over there where these wagon transportation companies were located, like in the 1870s, 1880s. A real famous one would be W.A. Taney. You can see a photo of his wagon team on the right. He really specialized in the movement of goods up to the silver mining town of Mogollon that was established in the early 1880s, approximately 70 miles to the north of Silver City. Hotels. When the railroad came, you had a lot of travelers coming in and out of Silver City. And so you had a lot of hotels. Some of the nicest hotels included the Timmer House and the Southern Hotel. Now look at that photo on the bottom right. That's the Southern Hotel circa 1885. That's the old Bennett Brothers store at the northeast corner of Hudson and Broadway. Just imagine that Snappy Mart where it's located today. And look at that hill behind it. That hill goes up the Brewer Hill. And I think that's the railroad there, but it is. So the railroad ended right there, and the traveler could just get off the train and then just go right into the hotel. That's why the Southern Hotel and the nearby Timmer House were some of the finest hotels to stay at in Silver City. It was interesting, when I was doing research, I learned about a Chinese man by the name of Crazy Horse. At least that's what the locals called him. He had a laundry at the back of the Broadway Hotel. And that made me think, why did the Chinese get into the laundry trade, the laundry business? Well, partly it was because these hotels needed to have their linens cleaned every day. And of course, people want their clothes to be cleaned as well. The Chinese got into the laundry business. There was a vibrant Chinese community that I think our future presentation by Tom Hester will be talking about in more detail. That is, they also engaged in food production. I think that they rented agricultural lands just to the south of town, what the locals called the Chinese Gardens, where they engaged in truck farming. Truck farming is when a farmer produces a small amount of food and they truck it in or transport it into town. And furthermore, that helps to explain why the Chinese got into the grocery business, as well as opening up restaurants. And just imagine yourself at the corner of Yankee and Texas streets. That was sort of like where the Chinese lived, almost as if it was a Chinatown in itself. So we'll learn more about that in later presentations. Ranching, again, was one of these commodities, or excuse me, cattle was one of these commodities that brought wealth into the region. I can't talk about all the ranches, but I will talk about one ranch. It was the largest ranch in Grant County, called the LC Ranch and Cattle Company. Like a lot of business owners, this branch was started by 2 individuals that came originally to participate in the mining industry. A lot of these businessmen came as miners They came as mining engineers and prospectors. Their names was Thomas Lyons and Angus Campbell. In the year of 1880, they sell their mining investments and they go into ranching full time, but then they take it to the next level. They incorporate their ranch in New Jersey in 1884. They're now able to sell stock. They raise tremendous amounts of capital amounting to $1.5 million to purchase not just more cattle, but more ranches. They created a monopoly even that helps me to explain why their holdings extended from their ranch headquarters in the town of Gila, located about 20 miles to the west of Silver City, all the way south to Lordsburg. That's a tremendous size of land that the LC Ranch and Cattle Company owned. And they were innovative. And this is what they did. From my research, tell me if I'm wrong, they were the first ones to ship cattle to California. Generally speaking, these early ranches, when they were established, they were intending to sell their cattle back east. Usually they'd ship them by rail up to Colorado to be fattened in Colorado before being shipped to Chicago to be slaughtered at the meat packing plants of like Gustavus Swift. The LC Ranch and Cattle Company realized that there's two markets back east, with the railroad back east, as well as in California. Why? You got Los Angeles, and to some extent San Diego are growing, and southern New Mexico is ideally located to sell cattle to the East Coast and to the West Coast. And so they really, I think, begin a process whereby other ranchers would do the same. I was interviewing a man months ago. He said in the early 20th century, all the cattle destined for California was shipped from Lordsburg, and all the cattle destined for the East Coast was shipped via Deming. So I think the LC Ranch and Cattle Company were quite innovative. They were also innovative in the sense that they established 3 subsidiaries to this corporation. The LC Meat Market, which was an outlet for their food in Silver City. They started what was called the Gila Farm Company. That is, they started to engage in farming. They practiced sharecropping. Poor, impoverished Hispano families would rent land from this corporation, and they would pay off their rent in food. Think about the institution of sharecropping in the Deep South at the end of the Civil War. Well, sharecropping existed here in Grant County as well. And in 1892, they would establish a store. And you can see a photo of that store on the left. Yeah, Thomas Lyons would ultimately be murdered in El Paso in the year of 1917. He really had engendered a lot of enemies because he was a monopolist and he was ruthless in his business practices, and the roosters came to roost, as the expression goes. And we don't know exactly why he got murdered, but one of the theories is that the people that hated him, the ones that murdered him in El Paso in the year 1917. So businesses start to change in the 20th century in several different ways. First of all, we have new types of minerals and precious metals being mined, including fluorspar, which was used as a flux for smelting, the mining of zinc that was used to create new metal alloys like brass, and manganese to strengthen steel. I want you to be thinking about Andrew Carnegie and how he sells all of his steel factories to J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan creates a U.S. Steel in 1902. We have this growing steel industry, and manganese becomes a commodity that is in high demand back east. A good example of a company that mined manganese on Boston Hill would be the Massachusetts and New Mexico Mining Company. They would purchase the old legal tender claims in 1880. And because their headquarters were in Boston, the local people started to call the legal tender hill Boston Hill. So Boston Hill, it's named after this company, essentially. And then think about you hiking up on Boston Hill. All those pits they're not necessarily silver mines. Those are old manganese mines, from what I can tell.
Okay.
And it's to meet the demand for the steel industry at the dawn of the modern era. Other minerals that I find interesting would be uranium. The first mining of uranium in New Mexico occurred right here in Grant County. And it started in 1919 when a woman by the name of Mrs. Frances Leach discovered the first uranium ores in the White Signal District, approximately 20 miles to the south of Silver City. She didn't make a lot of money, nor did her husband, on selling this mineral, this uranium. There would be a company called the Rator Mining and Manufacturing Company that would come into existence in the early 1920s that tried to make money selling uranium products. They were based in Tyrone. In this period of time, it's a different worldview. They believed that uranium had certain health benefits. And so this company, they sought to sell uranium mineral water. It was like an energy drink to give you energy. A medical device to make that mineral water. They created uranium facial cream, salts, toothpaste. The paint that had uranium in it tended to glow. And I also found yesterday, doing a little extra research, that they also marketed a type of fertilizer that had uranium in it. So on the far left, you can see the trademark for Rator's radium mineral water. I think another example of how business changed in the early 20th century would be corporations financing the production of copper. And think about Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, electrical devices, the incandescent light bulb. You need wiring, and copper wire is the best in, to convey electricity. It's a great conduit, as it were. And so because of the growing electrical industry at the beginning of the 20th century, copper increases in demand. And so by the dawn of the 20th century, you see these corporations selling stock, allowing them to start the process of open pit mining. It's basically an example of an economy of scale. The more input you put in to the production of something, the more output you can get, and the profits go up exponentially. So the first time that open pit mining begins would occur at the beginning of the 20th century. This would result in the creation of company towns that we had never seen before. Company towns like Tyrone, located about 15 miles to the south of Silver City, or Hurley, which would be established about 10 miles to the east of Silver City, and the old mining town that started with the Spanish, Santa Rita, would increasingly become dominated by the corporation. And the one corporation I want to highlight is the Chino Copper Company. Why? Because to this day, we still call that mine over there the Chino mine. And when you go over there, you see that big, huge pit. The Chino Copper Company acquired the claims in Santa Rita in the year of 1909. They're the ones that really started that process of open pit mining that is still seen to this day. The Chino Copper Company, they would increasingly take over the region. They essentially would make the town of Santa Rita a company town. They maintained a policy of segregation. Now think about this, segregation in the deep south between whites and blacks is nothing new. Segregation here in Grant County begins with the corporations in which Anglos and Hispanos were segregated as company policy. And again, I'm talking about the company towns. Santa Rita, Anglos lived in one part of town, Hispanos lived in another part of town. Let me talk about some of the businesses in Santa Rita. You have the Santa Rita Company Store. It was established in the 1890s. When the Chino Copper Company acquired its claims in the area in 1909, they also purchased the Santa Rita Company Store. Now think about this, that old song, I sold my soul to the company store. The company store had a policy of issuing just enough credit to to the employees of the Chino Copper Company to keep the employees in debt to the store, obligating them to always return back to work. That is how these company stores worked. Now, other businesses opened up in Santa Rita so long as they were not in competition with the Santa Rita company store. And these businesses would include, for example, the Elite Cafe, or sometimes it was called the Santa Rita Cafe. By the way, only Anglos could go to that restaurant. Another business that opened up was the San Nicolas Cafe. But by the way, only Hispanos could go there because this is a segregated company town. Other businesses were allowed to open up, like Pedro Gomez's. Here's another Hispano-owned business that I just think more research needs to be done. This Hispano-owned business, Pedro Gomez's Orpheum Theater. Both Anglos and Hispanos could go and see movies together, but Anglos could only sit on one side of the theater. Hispanos would sit on the other side of the theater. And another really neat business that I would love to do some research on would be P.W. Samaniego Zapateria. So Zapateria in English means a shoe shop. So basically, he repaired shoes. So he wasn't in direct competition with the Santa Rita company store because the Santa Rita company store sells new shoes. But you had a lot of Hispanic-owned businesses in Santa Rita, in spite of the fact that it was a company town. We should also mention, too, that these corporations initiated a dual wage system over there in Santa Rita, as well as in other company holdings, where Hispanos got paid less than Anglos for the same job being performed. That comes to an end after World War II through the great efforts of one Clinton Jenks, who was a union organizer, and he would lead the famous Empire Zinc strike just outside of Hanover, New Mexico, between the years of 1950 and 1952. And that strike ultimately helps to end this dual wage system, and this strike was made famous in the movie Salt of the Earth. More cash is in circulation. This will lead to greater levels of specialization. Here in Silver City, you would have the first cash stores that would actually open up in the 1890s. I would like to emphasize Ian Feng's 5 and Dime store. You can see a photo of it on the right. He sold toys, candy, and Japanese goods for 5, 10, and 25 cents. You have more cash in circulation. Bookstores can sell books to individuals that have cash. Blackwell's bookstore is something I want to do more research on. They sold not only books, but also musical instruments and sheet music. Entertainment venues opened up in the 20th century, the most famous being the Silco. Where do we get the word Silco from, or the name? Silver and copper. They combined it together and had Silco. I think around 1924, I think that opened up in the 1920s. And other theaters, of course, would open up as well. You can see a photo on the right there of the Silco Confectionery. So right next to the theater entrance, there was a small little cafe. And so that's a photo from the 1940s. Automobile companies opened up, including local family-owned automobile businesses, not just Ford outlets. And so I'm really interested in, for example, Bennett Motors Company. They sold cars, they worked on cars, but they also transported small parcels and packages from Silver City to nearby mining communities in the outskirts of town. Dairies. I interviewed Alexis Harsh. She taught me everything about the Rosedale Dairy. Now imagine yourself there shopping at Albertsons. Behind Albertsons, there's the old Rosedale Road. That was where the Rosedale Dairy was located. And the thing about the Rosedale Dairy is that it's not only the oldest dairy in Grant County, but it also, by the 1920s and 1930s, operated a fleet of delivery trucks. And you can see one of those delivery trucks right there. I'm talking about family-owned local businesses. But the modern period begins to see the establishment of national department stores. Walmart is not yet having a presence in town. Think about Walmart. Think about Kmart. Think about Albertsons. Think about J.C. Penney and Company. J.C. Penney and Company was from my research, it was the first national department chain store to open up here in Silver City, which they do in 1920. And then in 1941, they will open up a new store on Bullard Street. And on the far right, you can see the photo of the J.C. Penney Company store in the 1950s. That was where the Carneros workshops were about 10 years ago. I think that with economic expansion, opportunities for women to go into business increased. And that would include Elizabeth Warren. I could talk about Madame Millie, who was a famous brothel owner, but I just don't have the time. Elizabeth Warren, she arrived in Silver City in 1882 with her husband. Together, they operated an insurance company. However, when her husband died, she operated that insurance company by herself, making her the first female insurance agent in New Mexico history. She was also the first female public notary in New Mexico history. She opened up what was called Grant County Abstract Company, and she then goes into real estate, buying buildings in town and buying the famous Timmer House, which she renames Hotel San Vincent, which you can see on the left. And then she goes into construction. She opens up a construction firm with another woman by the name of Matilda Kohler, who came here to be a school superintendent, but decided to resign, maybe because she could make more money running this company. And so together, these women operated or managed, I think I should say, managed a cement plant, a rock quarry and crusher, a sawmill, carpenter shop, blacksmith, paint shop. These were located at the northern end of Bullard Street, by the way. And think about those tall sidewalks in downtown that are purposely tall. I mean, they're like, what, 2.5 feet tall because of all the flooding? They were built by Elizabeth Warren and Matilda Kohler. They not only built those sidewalks that we're still using to this day, but also several different buildings. And some of the first reinforcements along the ditch were also built by her construction firm. Government spending in healthcare helps to explain why Silver City was sustainable, why it didn't become a ghost town. So let me talk a little bit about healthcare and the first sanatoriums and hot springs. These were businesses who catered to patients suffering from tuberculosis. Because of the dry weather, it makes it easier to breathe when a person's suffering from tuberculosis. And when a person suffers from arthritis, soaking in hot springs is also beneficial. So some of the early sanatoriums that we need to mention would be Cottage Sanatorium that was established by Dr. Earl Bullock in 1900. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this sanatorium because I anticipate that Heather Moreland, who will be giving a presentation in August on the history of healthcare for this series, will talk a little bit more about it. But I'm more interested in this sanatorium. I came across this about 2 weeks ago, and it was called the Africo Tubercular Sanatorium. It was established in 1914 just for African Americans suffering from tuberculosis. And it was located on the east side of town. I found an article in the vertical file at Miller Library on this. And then when I was doing more research, I found this donation pin. See the green image on the bottom right? This is part of the New Mexico Museum's collection, and it's a donation pin for the Africo Tubercular Sanatorium. And it's basically soliciting donations to support this sanatorium for African Americans. I mean, you know, they're using acronyms like for our colored people, but you can see near Fort Baird, Silver City, New Mexico. And of course, if it's on the east side of town, that's generally where many of the African Americans live, like Rebecca Brewer. So you sort of wonder I need to do more research on this African American, the sanatorium for African Americans. Faywood Hot Springs, we all have heard of. It was originally called Hudson Hot Springs. It was developed by 3 men when they purchased it in 1900. And the name Faywood actually comes from the combination of the last names of 2 of these owners by combining the name Fay with the name Lockwood. Ultimately, the 3rd owner would come to own the facility completely by the 1920s. And I came across this bottle while doing research. Apparently in the 1920s, when McDermott was managing the Faywood Hot Springs, he marketed mineral water from the hot springs, and he created his own bottle company. And you got to look close, but it says McDermott Bottlers, Faywood Springs, New Mexico. And in the research, it showed that he marketed this mineral water back east and in Europe. So, the question is, how profitable was this? But it's something that a lot of historians are not talking about. And that includes the Africo Tubercular Sanatorium. I think that's fascinating. I'm ending my presentation. Government spending would help to bring money into this economy. Military contracts pumped money into this economy. When the Veterans Hospital there at Fort Baird was created in the early 20th century, nurses were hired. They came, they got a paycheck. They would spend that money locally. So it was a veterans hospital treating veterans. When the normal school was established in Silver City in 1893, which would then become which would become the New Mexico Teacher College, which today is Western New Mexico University, some of the early contracts to build the first buildings were awarded to local contracting companies like Lazier and Grigg. That contracting firm built Old Main, which was one of the larger buildings at the top of the hill on the campus of the New Mexico Teachers College. And think about this. Students came here to matriculate through an education curriculum. I mean, they're learning how to be teachers, but they spent their money locally. So I came across this some years ago, a business called Phillips Gift Store. Have you heard of it? Cool. And I can't remember where the advertisement was, but they advertised that they sold textbooks for the normal school. The idea of a university bookstore doesn't develop until after World War II, from what my research says. So where did they get their books? They went down to town to buy their textbooks from local bookstores and this sort of thing. Well, how about the New Deal? The Works Progress Administration to employ people during the Great Depression. They were paid to build sidewalks. For example, when you walk into certain parts of town, you'll see WPA sidewalks. That one that I took a photo of was right outside my house, and it says 1938 it was completed. The WPA employed workers to build a high school on the campus of the New Mexico Teachers College. That was called Western High School. That pumped money. What about James Stadium, Old James Stadium? Go onto the campus of Western New Mexico University, go to the top of Old James Stadium, and you'll see that plaque. And I took a photo of that, and that helps to show that the WPA paid for the construction of that stadium. Again, paychecks were spent locally. And what about municipal spending? Go across the 12th Street Bridge on 12th Street and look at the plaque there. It was built by the Tash Construction Company. I guess it was owned by a man by the name of Fred Tash. He was awarded a municipal contract to build that bridge. So because Silver City was the county seat, a lot of municipal money and county money flowed into the local business community. So I need to conclude. This is a historical economy that is not diversified relative to back east. It's a volatile economy based on raw commodity extraction and production. And thank God, government spending and a burgeoning health industry would help to mitigate the volatility of those commodity prices. So let me end with an epilogue. Epilogues are when we, for the historian, is when we take the history and we connect it to today. We're still, I argue, a rural economy. We're still dependent on ranching, mining, government spending, and hospital care. But the questions that I would like to ask us to consider would be, what are other types of businesses that help to bring money into Grant County? What about tourism? What about remote workers? How about this? Can buying products from local family-owned businesses help to keep money in the community? I think about the business owned by a Hispanic family in Bayard by the name, and the company is called Mi Ranchito Foods. You can go to any one of these stores and Snappy Marts and buy their products. You're keeping money in the community. And shopping at the co-op. R&L up there does auto services, Warner Tires. Instead of going to the national brands, shop locally. Can that help sustain a business community today? So that's my presentation. And I am looking forward to any questions or comments that you might have. Thank you.
That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Dr. Fritz. So at this point, we're going to take a few minutes to answer some questions before we take a break, and then come back and hear from our commentators, and we're going to talk about a little bit more of the present day. But right now, let's get some questions in about Dr. Fritz's presentation. So first off, I'd like to ask a question from Gail Avignon. She wants to know if the natives sold copper to each other pre-Spanish.
No, I do not think so. My guess is that they might have used copper for ornamental purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, Native Americans, particularly the Apache, they opposed the digging of the earth, so that if there was a precious metal that one had to dig underneath the surface, that was something that they would never do, because they consider the earth as sacred. But when you look at some of the records, the first copper could literally be picked up from the surface of the ground over there in Santa Rita. So my guess is they might have picked it up for ornamental purposes, but I've never come across them trading copper. I mean, you think about copper is a soft metal. It really doesn't have much utility beyond that which is ornamental. But I would like to actually ask some Native Americans today, like for example, Joe Sines, who is a member of the Chininidae Nation here in Grant County. I bet he could answer that question in more detail.
All right, thank you very much, Joy. Gail, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, let me know. We have another comment here. Patricia Toro just wants you to know, thanks for a great presentation. And she loves how you link the historical events to present day, which is definitely something that we're very interested in, and we love the ability to do that. Another Facebook question that I'm not entirely sure if I'm right about this. Patrick Lima says FJ Davidson and Belen Steppens with a question mark. So I'm guessing that he is, that those were businesses maybe. Have you heard of them?
No. Now, is he talking about David Abraham?
I'm not sure.
Do you know anything about those businesses here? Oh, in Pinos Altos? I see. Yeah, I don't know anything about those businesses.
Okay. Patrick, if you're out there and you want to expand on that, let me know.
Yeah, because I would like to know, were they general merchant firms? And then I could talk a little bit more about the basic system of merchant capitalism as it operated in mining towns.
Got it. And Joyce Newman wants to know what have been your best sources for local historical knowledge.
A
Maybe
newspaper.
something all of our scholars can answer a little.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, newspapers from the time period, there's a lot of economic information. The only problem is that those articles, like published in newspapers from like the 1870s, 1880s, tended to celebrate the merchants. So you really don't see a more critical side of them. So you got to sort of deconstruct that bias.
The vertical file at the library.
The vertical file at Miller Library has all these more current newspaper articles and clippings, and that was very productive. And when I use secondary sources like books and journal articles, I mean, you get a lot more information quicker. But luckily, a lot of my research goes back to my master's thesis, and I did a lot of research into the primary sources. When you look at quartermaster records with the United States military, that's fascinating because you can just see the relationship that merchants, usually it was the wholesale merchants, people like Henry Lisinski had, and they're the ones winning the contracts. So that's really interesting to see how much government money flowed into the private sector through quartermaster records. So I think those are the main sources that I've been using. I want to interview local people more and more. They have a great amount of information that can be offered, as well as old photos. I mean, the Silver City Museum has a great collection of photos, like this photo right behind me. This is, I guess that's the famous cave saloon, I'm thinking.
Pinos Altos Cave.
Oh,
Saloon.
I see. Pinos Altos Caves. So this is a famous business in Pinos Altos called the Cave Saloon. So photos as well were helpful in my research.
Great, thank you very much. I have Marcia would like to talk to you. I am going to bring her on live right now. Marcia, are you there? Marcia?
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Go ahead and ask your question.
This isn't Marcia. Hi, I just wanted to ask, first of all, thank you very much. As a fairly new resident to Silver, amazingly informative, answered a lot of questions about what I'm seeing around town. My main question is, what caused the demise of the rail spur that came up to Silver? It looks like they actually went to all the effort to tear it up and remove it like it never happened.
My understanding is that the railroad ended, in the 1950s?
Passenger service.
Passenger service ended in the 50s.
Then in the 70s for the freight service, right? When they tore down the.
I'm asking the resident scholars here because they know more than I do.
The manganese mines kept shipping at least through the 70s, and they took the line out in 1983, 100 years after the first railroad arrived.
So let me just repeat what I just learned was that passenger service largely ended in the 50s, and then the manganese mines continued to be in operation. And so manganese was still exported by train out of Silver City all through the 1960s and 1970s. And in 1983, the railroad stopped operation. So yeah, thank you for that question, because you've actually allowed me to learn a little bit more about Silver City history. Thank you.
As a footnote to Fort Bayard, I lived in Roswell as a child when the Air Force Base in Roswell closed, Walker Air Force Base, and I believe about 40% of the population of the town left. The town went into great economic depression. So I'm surprised with, frankly, the demise of the main activities at Bayard that there wasn't an attendant impact on the local economy. And it's probably this mining kept it alive.
Yeah, I think mining, the fact that we have the county seat here in Silver City, we have that healthcare industry, But you know what? I think the town of Central was quite impacted. When I look at old photos of Central, and Central was just located south of Fort Bayard, it looked like it had a really vibrant business corridor, but nowadays it's not the case. So, I think I could argue that Fort Bayard, it really wasn't a major source of income for the region, except for the nearby town of Central, or which today we call the village of Santa Clara.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question. I have a comment from Steve Maxwell on Facebook. He says a lot of great information. It was a great presentation and he learned a lot, and wants to let you know that his family owned some of those local businesses back in the 20s. The most successful was the Pennington Wholesale Groceries, which delivered to groceries to businesses as far as Modillon.
Yeah, you're the type of people that I want to interview. Because I was saying that another type of source are oral interviews. And that's my real interest is really the history of family-owned businesses in southwestern New Mexico in the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, it hasn't been done. This history has not been done. And that's why I'm really enthusiastic about finding people, like you, that I might be able to interview. So interesting. So the last name is Maxwell?
Yes.
Okay.
It's Steve Maxwell. He's on Facebook apparently. And I will let them know on Facebook. If you are watching, if you would like to contact Dr. Fritz or any of our panelists or guests, go ahead and send an email to me at education@silvercitymuseum.org, and we will pass that along. That's one of the great things about these programs is that we're able to make those contacts and keep the research going. So I will put that in there. And a question from David Cantu, I'm sorry, who would like to know if your research led to any other connections to West Texas.
To some extent, yes. Henry Lazinski, he purchased agricultural products all throughout the Mesilla Valley as well as the El Paso Valley. And I think I recently came across how one of the family members had a store in El Paso, and they got agricultural products as far away as San Elizario. Now, when you think about this area before the coming of the railroad, Las Cruces was on the crossroads, as I argue in one of the articles that I wrote years ago now, on the crossroads of commerce. So you had really two roads, one going north and south that followed the Rio Grande River, and then another one going east-west through West Texas. So I think that helps to explain why this region sort of was on the crossroads of commerce. Of course, Silver City itself is sort of, how would we say, located about 2 hours away from the Mesilla Valley. I'm trying to think, what else can I say about that? Beyond that, I haven't come across a lot regarding Texas. Maybe my fellow colleagues can think of something. David Abraham. Oh, very good. So David Abraham.
And Matt Schutz.
I was just going to say the Schutz brothers were based in El Paso, I believe. Mm-hmm. So David Abraham, I think he's the one that bought the Bennett Brothers store and hired Robert Black to renovate the second story, and he made it into the Southern Hotel. So he has Texas connection, but then you have the Schutz brothers. And so they too had business connections in El Paso. So So yeah, there are some connections. So let me just again repeat two names, Max Schutz and the Schutz brothers, and David Abraham. David Abraham would be also have connections with El Paso. So these are great questions. I'm learning a lot.
They are great questions. We are went a little bit over and we're running short of time. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our panelists later. So let's just take a few more. And I want to remind everybody out there to, if you have any more questions that we're unable to talk to get to, or if you would like to see about some more information that our scholars may come up with later or that they might want to look into, then email me at education@silvercitymuseum.org and we'll keep the conversation going. Before we do that, I have a few more. Brandy Barasas would like to know if you found any information on the mining town in the Little Walnut area.
No, I don't know anything about that. Where the Cleveland mine site is? Yeah, okay. So there is the Cleveland mine up there. I found one reference that the Pinos Altos Mining Company that was established in the 1860s was operating the Cleveland mine. Is that true? I found one.
The Cleveland mine was owned by the New Jersey company that owned the zinc mine at Fierro.
Okay, that would be in the 20th century.
Cleveland over to Fierro.
Okay. So beyond that, I don't know anything more, but I think that's the Cleveland mine site. And it sounds like there was a mining camp called Cleveland. And that's what the community, my colleagues are affirming to us. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Marcia had a quick comment that they live in the toy grocery store and look forward to learning more about the establishment of the business. So that's an interesting one.
Where Yi and Feng's store was? No.
White toy.
White toy.
White toy.
I don't know which one that would be.
It's on market in Texas.
Yeah, her toy would know about
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
He worked for them.
Yeah, so this is an example of the type of research that I want to do more in the future.
Texas and Market. Texas and Market, she says.
That's where it is. I'm gonna write that on a piece of paper. Texas and Market, and the name of is it the name of the business?
White
In
toy.
town.
White toy.
White
T-O-Y.
Came in the
The
early.
toy grocery store.
White toy came in one of my colleagues is saying that it was established in the 1930s.
I love it when all the straight lines get together.
I see. Are they of Chinese descent? And they're
1930s.
Chinese descent. Very interesting.
Okay. Mary Reagan says Trost and Trost Architectural built much of Silver City in the first quarter of the 1900s, based in El Paso.
Yes.
Yes.
David Cantu would like you to know that they are from San Elizario.
Okay.
That was the person who had the question
Yeah.
about West Texas.
Yeah.
At this point, I would like to take a short break. And then when we come back, we're going to have our guest commentators come on. We have Lee Gruber from Southwest New Mexico ACT and Chamber of Commerce. We have Stephen Chavira and George Carr. You may know him from the radio and for the Green Chamber County of Commerce, Grant County Chamber of Commerce. And if you guys want some more information on a lot of the things that Scott has talked about, if you're interested in Clinton Jenks, we have a book here. Oh, sorry, it's that you may want to see at the Silver City Museum. We also have new cups, Silver City Museum cups and t-shirts, courtesy of the awesome graphic designer, Mr. Brian Hyde. We have some minerals for sale at the store, also copper. It comes from the ground. and much of our economy is based off of it. And we have on exhibit here an example of that radium water, or a bottle that the radium was in. It's safe now, promise. But it really happened. So we have some of that on exhibit, as well as some of the minerals that were mined from the Chino mine and around this area that goes into the making of copper, all very important to our economy. But when we come back, we'll hear a little bit more about what all this means for us today. There are some big questions to ask, big questions that Scott asked, and some more that I think can be answered. Now I would love to introduce our esteemed guests. We have Mr. Chavira, who is with the Grant County Chamber of Commerce. He is the executive officer and also has been a small business coach and small business specialist in his own agency, Success. We have Mr. George Carr, who I spoke about earlier. He wanted me to let everybody know that he has been practicing law in Florida for 40 years and still didn't get it right. Moved here in May of 2015, and it was a great decision. And he has been on the board of directors of the radio station, the ACLU, the Green Chamber of Commerce, and is a last-ditch replacement for Raul Turrieta, because he was sitting next to him when he told me that he couldn't come here. So I said, what about George? Get George. Is George there? Tell George he's coming. And and the wonderful Lee Gruber, who is the director of the Clay event, which is coming up, I believe it's this week, and also of Southwest New Mexico Act. So we are very lucky to have everybody together. And here are our stallers. We have Tom Hester, who will be presenting in just a few weeks on diversity and cultural identity. We have Stephen Fox, who besides being a wonderful technical person who can push all of the buttons on the thing, will be speaking on the environment. Susan Berry was here last week with community building, and Doug Dinwiddie started off our series here with the role of government. I want to thank Joe Lutz, who is our communications manager and is doing a great job of minding that, and Alan, who is talking in my ear and letting me know who would like to come on. So what do you guys think? Scott asked some great questions. So where do you think all of this information about the history of the economy is pertinent to modern day issues?
Well, I would just love to say, first of all, if I don't mind me jumping in, but I enjoyed Dr. Fritz's presentation. I thought it was very comprehensive and gave a lot of great information about what brought us to where we are today. And, you know, talked a lot, obviously the founding and all the names that we all know, and the streets that are named after those people. But it's the fabric of all that they brought that brings our community to where it is today, and literally brings us to where we are today, because it developed a very, very strong foundation for our community, both economically and culturally. And it puts us in a great position to really begin to move forward or continue moving forward. And so I think we're in a great position right now with respect to where we got started.
Great. Lee, George?
Well, I have to say, am I coming through? I always have technical issues.
Nope, you're just great.
Okay. I agree with Steve. It was a great presentation, and it does tell us how we got to where we are today. And I think that it has two really big teaching points. The first is that the concentration of economic power around the mines has, especially when it comes to the creation of racial segregation, is a real drag on the economy. You know, it limits everybody's opportunities to get the best paying job. And I think that
Welcome
I
to
think that as far as moving forward, we have to really pay attention to the fact that there has been such a concentration of economic power, and there has to be
Please mute yourself if you're not speaking because of all the feedback.
it would be healthy if we could have local businesses that are in competition with each other.
Thank you. Okay, sorry.
The second thing is we've been really dependent on commodities, especially mining. We're now at a position globally, and certainly in this county, where we need to recognize that this is not really very sustainable in the long term. I have to say one of my best impressions of this county is that there's more talent per square inch when it comes to dealing with innovative ideas than anywhere I've lived. We have tremendously, we are super abundant in sustainable commodities. We have a lot of sunlight, we have a lot of wind, and we have a lot of biomass. This is where our economy can really go in the future. And here again, paying attention to the fact that Henry Flagler and William Randolph Hearst were not necessarily concerned at all about our local welfare. As we develop these sustainable resources, we really need to make sure that the control of these resources is maintained locally in viable businesses. That's what I think, for what it's worth.
Okay. Lee?
I would have to agree with things that Steve and George have both said. I always think to myself that you have to be careful for what you wish for as you develop an economy, that everybody's looking at outdoor rec now as a possibility, certainly tourism, certainly the sun and wind and all the wonderful things that we have here. But yes, I would just mention, we do need to be careful for what we wish for. And I look for the hope for our community in small entrepreneurial businesses that figure out a way to make a living here.
Yeah. Does anybody out there, something I'm curious about, what do we think are some of the biggest problems and hurdles that are faced by people opening small businesses in this area or wanting to keep them going? And if anyone from the audience out there, we want to hear from you. So let me know and come on live if you're interested. What do you think?
Well, I think I can jump into that answer. And Aaron, I think that's a great question. When you say what are some of the problems that people are facing with opening small businesses? And I want to go back to Dr. Fritz's presentation where he talked about how people came into the area as miners and decided to start businesses. And the key takeaway that I got from this whole presentation was that people were not experts in the field that they wanted to go into. They just knew that there was a need that needed to be met. So they jumped into the loan business, they jumped into the mercantile business, they jumped into the trading, you name it. There was a need there that needed to happen. They weren't necessarily cognizant or they didn't necessarily think about, or I don't know the right way to put it, but the risk that was involved, the need was bigger than the risk that they were taking. So they did it. Today, we have, because technology is at our fingertips and because of competition and you're aware of what else is going on, people tend to not jump into the fray because they either think somebody else has the market or they don't have the skill enough to do it. And I just want to tell people that Take the example from way back when the Cohens or the Goldings or the Lazinskis, they just did it. And they created a market and were profitable for the most part. Some went belly up, but that's the way life is in general. Go for it, try it, start a business, because we need that. And you started off this presentation by talking about the local economy. You know, the money stays local, it helps local, people benefit, but we've got to start businesses locally. And you know, I have so much more that I can say, but I want to give George and Lee and Dr. Scott something to answer.
Yeah.
From my perspective, probably the biggest challenge has to do with sustainable kinds of energy production and the use of biomass. The major oil companies are all now under the gun to try and diversify their portfolios and to try and get into sustainable energy and also into the creative use of biomass. I think that it's, you know, this presents a real challenge. There are plenty of people around here who I've met and who I deeply admire, who have, who recognize the need and are anxious to try and build up sustainable kinds of green businesses. And the competition that they're going to face is from these really large major corporations. And here I think the government has a really significant role through the creative use of low interest loans and grants and those kinds of things. That's really what we should be pushing. I certainly admire Martin Heinrich's suggestion about the creation of a civilian conservation corps. This is the kind of thing that could, you know, give the market share and the ability to compete against larger organizations a real chance. And this, to me, this is probably like the biggest issue as to the future of our local economy goes.
That's a pretty good pretty good statement. I am going to use one of the great Zoom features here and launch a poll to our audience, and our panelists can answer as well. I just want to see if people out there feel, do investments in sustainable energy represent an important part of our economic future? So I'm going to put that out there for you guys to vote on. And you can also answer on Facebook as well if you are on there. And let's see how this goes. Going. I want to see how people feel about this. Anybody else? Joyce Newman says that maintaining authenticity is important. Okay. So this is a sustainable energy. Does anybody know if we have, how do you feel about the efforts towards sustainable energy in our economy? And do you know what efforts are being made in that direction to help small businesses? Maybe.
Well, you know, there's always efforts that are being made to do that and make sure that our economy is strong and stable. It's always a risk when we're dependent on one realm of the economic base to keep our state going. But as we know, small business has been the backbone of our country, and making sure that we have to use the word that George used, a diverse portfolio of economic drivers is very important, not only for our state, but locally. We've got to be able to capitalize on the resources that we have, use them the right way, and make sure that we are providing or creating sustainable efforts to do that. But, you know, while we are looking at diversification, we also have to consider that on the world scale, you know, energy is important, sustainable fuel is important, sustainable resources. And so I think driving down one path is not the only way to go. We've got to really look at all that we have available.
All right. Okay. So what other paths do you think might be ones that we should be following that we're not maybe investing as much in as a community as we possibly could?
Well, we live in the not the valley of the sun, but gosh, we've got so much sunlight available to us. We got solar power, we've got wind power. Ask anybody who's here for even 5 minutes in the springtime. We've got lots of wind, we've got lots of energy. We've got to maintain or capture those and use them, as well as the rich mineral and fossil fuels that we have in our part of the world. So.
All right, good one. Linda Pafford is asking about senior care. Do we think that could be another?
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
This community is wide open for small business development that can look to an aging population. A lot of people are moving here who are retired, who are trying to get out of the big cities. So that's a definite opening for small business development, as well as other commodities. I mean, not everybody is going to have a solar powered business. I mean, we need things in our community, and you can figure out a way to produce things that you can send outside of this community, which is an important thing to do if you want to try to develop a small business here.
Yeah, the desires are still the same, right? When they founded our county, and in the beginning of the 19th century, when they found that, they wanted to make sure that we had that we were able to export goods and services. We wanted to send our business out into the world. The question that's asked just on the chat for Syzygy Tile, what challenges did Lee and her husband face to bring that business to market? Well, they knew that if they depended only on Silver City or Grant County to make their business, it would be a tougher time. So Lee and her husband went off about getting out into the world and reaching distributors across the country and worldwide. And so they built their business by exporting products. They were developed locally, they were made locally, they hired local people, but they exported them out around the country. So that's not something that only Lee Gruber was able to do. There's a lot of people that have done that and could do that. And we've got to continue to realize that the world is our marketplace.
Yes. Let's see, we have a question from John. This is a good one. Are tourists turning into new residents? Is that a good thing or gentrification? Ooh.
That's a good question. Lee, what do you think?
Well, of course, it depends upon the person, the tourist. But they're wonderful, interesting, innovative people of all ages moving into this community right now. So I too think tourism can get out of hand, but I don't think we should limit our thinking to not allowing for people who move here to be a totally wonderful asset for the community. And I do want to add that we owned Syzygy for 25 years. It took 15 years for the local community to move up to the top tier of interest and buying interest.
Right.
But the local community did move up to the top tier. So it can happen here in Silver City. Certainly hopes to develop a business outside of the community as
Right.
well too.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. And also to capture, comment on what Lee mentioned a while ago, you know, when in Rome, you do what the Romans do, right? You travel to Rome and you do what they do. You know what their customs are, you know what their histories are, and you do as the Romans do. The saying does not say, when in Rome, go and try to get them to do the way you used to do things back home. We love the tourists and we love how they come in, but there's a reason why they're drawn here. And it's our culture, it's our ways, it's the way of doing things, call it the Blanda Manana. But we all want to work together to keep those cultures, traditions, and what makes our region as unique as it is. We want to keep those intact. But yeah, it's I love when tourists come here. I love when they move here. I love when they love what they love. But we also have to keep things sort of traditional.
That's a great answer. Wow, this is a topic that we've stumbled onto. So let's hear the other side of that, gentrification. So what is the possible other side of it that tourists turning into new residents? Steve brought up something about not wanting to maintain authenticity in our town and not wanting to change everything to suit the outside world as much. And we've had some other people here comment on the chat box along the same ways. Joyce Newman mentions that we want to avoid mass tourism. And so I think that's just a really interesting point. And there's two sides of it. So our scholars, what do you guys think about gentrification? Let's define it and decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We can generally hear you through Scott's mic. Please. Okay. No, Scott, only one of you unmute at a time.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's unmuted now. So did y'all want to share? Because I can't say something about tourism. I mean, I'm a historian, so I'm going to view things through the past. There is a great book written by a historian who passed away a while back, who was at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. His name was Hal Rothman. And Hal Rothman writes a book called The Devil's Bargain. And he argues that in the mid-20th century, a lot of these Western towns that were dependent on commodity production and extraction, when the minerals played out, they turned to tourism. For example, Sun Valley, Idaho. And what he found was that these communities that became dependent now on tourism, well, you still had that business cycle. So when the economy went into recession, the last thing people spend money on is vacation. And so the problem continued for these Western towns. And so basically he's arguing that there needs to be many different sources of income. And that's what we're all are talking about. And I was thinking that, yes, indeed, tourism, it has its drawbacks. I think that if we look at the biomass plant outside of Deming, I don't know too much about it. There's a new solar plant just south of Deming. There's that wind farm on the Hatch Highway. So the region's moving in that direction. So I'll give George some kudos there for mentioning that. So that's just remote work. I mean, we're talking about today how people are, in the context of the COVID pandemic, are now able to work from wherever they would like. And so is that a new market that we can appeal to? Will that result in gentrification? You know, my goal in my presentation was to include both the Anglo and Hispano population. So, you know, how do we prevent gentrification from occurring, but still trying to open up new opportunities for businesses to relocate here and tourism to occur? You know, again, without gentrification, I mean, I think that's difficult. That's a difficult question to answer.
What about our other scholars over there? Susan?
When I was working at the museum 30 years ago, I remember people coming to Silver City, and a lot of the visitors at that time sort of found their way here. And one comment that does kind of stick with me is they were going at that time saying, this is such a great town. It reminds me of Santa Fe 30 years ago, which of course would now be 60 years ago. There is a danger of too much, but I would also agree with, I think it's what Stephen said, that the people who find their way here find something that resonates with them. They're drawn to Silver City's sort of unique character, and many of them have added to that character. So it's sort of a mixed bag. And then the question of why do people leave, and the lack of senior care, I think, is one of the aspects. So there's certain kind of self-limiting factors, water probably being one. Just the challenges of living here, being so far from a major airport, or people who want to be have closer access to things, amenities when they get older. So I'm just throwing those things out.
I would add that before I came back home and relocated again to Silver City, I lived for 6 years on the Front Range in Colorado. And Colorado has been discovered, and all kinds of massive problems, infrastructure problems. They weren't ready in Colorado along the Front Range for the massive migration of people that has continues to move there in great numbers. And in fact, we get visitors when I volunteer at Fort Bayard, a National Historic Site, and we get visitors there who oftentimes come from places like the Front Range on vacation, because they say the things that first attracted them to those locations have now gone away because of overpopulation and so forth. And they say they love coming to a part of the world where they can still go for a hike and not have to deal with trail traffic, so to speak. So there is a point at which you, as you say, don't want to, you need to be careful what you wish for, because we have to figure out what is that point of bringing enough people here to make us thrive without losing what brings them here.
Yeah.
And that is the challenge.
Yeah.
You know, we have a world-class biking event that takes place here. There could be very small businesses that build bikes, that build helmets. There's a wealth of possibility for developing small businesses that employ 20 to 30 people in our community and play off of the wonderful opportunities and things that attract people here. It doesn't have to be a huge development effort. It has to be attracting. I think we are attracting the kind of people. I see that in Co-Starters, this entrepreneurial program that Steve and I are working with. But we have had 50 small business ideas go through this program during the time of COVID. These ideas are not large scale. They're mostly not tourism oriented. I think there are lots of possibilities for development.
That's a great point that you're saying about not developing, depending too much on tourism. It goes back to Steve's earlier point about when in Rome. Joyce says a heavy dependence on tourism changes the complexion and identity of a place. Need to avoid tourists becoming the view of what residents and others say. So that's a great, Stephen?
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I just think the main thing that in order to prevent what Joyce is saying about heavy dependence on tourism changes the complexion of an identity of a community, is that we've got to make sure that we understand our cultural identity. We have to understand what brought us to where we are, why we are here. Dr. Fritz's epilogue, where he basically said that we are still a rural economy dependent on mining, ranching, government spending, and hospitality care, or hospital care. It's important. We know what brought us to where we are today. And as long as we maintain a strong identity of who we are and what we are as a community, then people coming in will understand that and work to enhance that identity. But it's by having a strong foundation of who we are that helps us when we talk about the entrepreneurial aspect of co-starters and things that we're doing. We create companies that enhance that identity, and we work together to maintain that.
You want it on or no?
So yeah, it's good points out there.
When Consuelo and I chose to live in Silver City, we were looking for certain things. We wanted to have a university close by. We wanted to be able to get the New York Times on Sunday. And we wanted to be close enough to Mexico that it would be convenient and not so hot that we wouldn't just fry during the summer. We found Silver City, and I think a lot of folks are in the same situation. It interests me that we have on Bullard Street a firm that was developed in Mexico. The owner went to school here in Silver City. She grew up more or less in Silver City, and she owns the Pink Store in Palomas. And now we have Pink Store North. It has interested me that we have not been able somehow as a community to recognize the vast, how shall I say, treasure of this community and being so close to Mexico and having folks who have real experiences as Chicanos or Mexican Americans in this community, that we somehow have not been able to take advantage of our position in the Southwest. And it's kind of interesting that it took a Mexican firm to come to Silver City to kind of show the way, if you will.
Yeah, Jose Macias was a Mexican merchant. And when I was thinking about that as well, Tom, that our connections with Mexico are close. And I think about Henry Edelman's autobiography, where he talked about in the 1870s, before the railroad arrived, that there would be these yearly caravans of Mexican merchants who came directly straight to Silver City to engage in trade with the merchants here in Silver City. And they brought food with them. So there was already a trade that basically, I think the railroad sort of ended. And then that border crossing there at Paloma side, they've just renewed it. I see trucks crossing that border. Yeah.
Here's a pretty good, Alan Raiden wants to know if real estate transaction taxes could possibly be a good way to make gentrifiers support local needs.
Well, I guess an answer to that is, I mean, it's got to be done smartly. Real estate transaction taxes, may not necessarily be the right way to do it. We've got people that want to come in. We do need the investment. We do need people to come in and want to invest in our community, but we also don't want to We want to encourage that, but not necessarily tell everybody, you know, just because you're coming in from out of town, we're going to charge you extra or impose extra taxes on that. That's not really the way to do it. What we want to do is we've got to create an environment where people want to invest, where people want to be here, and that the locals are still able to participate and share in that investment. We know a lot of people who are generational families in Santa Fe whose grandparents bought the house in 1943 or whatever for $6,000 and today couldn't afford it even if they tried. And so the reality is that we've got to be able to create an environment where our local, the people who have born and raised here, lived here, and been here generationally, still have a way to participate in the wealth and prosperity that is available within our county.
And
One thing I'd
anonymous,
like to add on that is we have a big advantage over places that have really suffered from gentrification, in that we have a whole lot of space. You know, there's not the equivalent kind of pressure put on our historic downtown as you would have in a major metropolitan region, because outsiders who are moving in can build a new home out in Wind Canyon or someplace like that.
Right.
but we
And
don't have water.
And I also have to say, unlike Tom Hester, the big attraction to this area when I first came here was the fact that it does have the tradition and history that's been so well maintained. So I think it's really critical that that be maintained, but I have to say that compared to major metropolitan areas where everybody wants to live close to town, we don't have that same kind of pressure here, and I think that that's a real advantage for us.
Here's a pretty good comment from an anonymous attendee, kind of going on that thread, who mentions that one way to control growth, and we'll talk about in a second, is that something that we even want to do, is to really regulate any companies from building semi to large subdivisions because of water, septic, roads, etc. And yes, we have tons of space. Yes, we can build roads to them, but water is our golden cap. I've heard from a lot of places.
And to answer that as well, you know, the subdivision concept is also not always a bad thing, because they create infrastructure. They create systems that are in place that help to keep keep things going well. It's not, we have a lot of colonias and a lot of colonial development in the area, and those colonias are developed because the land is there, but there's not really an infrastructure to make it ideal for somebody to live in. And so they have problems that are associated with that. But smart development, I won't say controlling development, but I would say smart development is important.
Yes. A little feedback from our poll came back, and 93% of you said that investments in sustainable energy are an important part of our economic future. So good to know. Linda Pafford wanted to add that Native Americans could possibly market their history, or that in general, we are an area that has a lot of history, and there may be ways to market that. I'm supposing that she means also as a exportable good. So that's a good angle. We have a lot of local authors and scholars and others that are writing about history.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that. East of Deming on Interstate 40, there is what's called Apache Homelands. And it's like a little cafe right off the interstate. That's part of the Fort Sill Apache Reservation. And it's really a nice little cafe. Get off and get hamburger or whatnot. They sell, I think, tobacco products tax-free. they're hoping to open up a casino, but they've not yet gotten permission from the governor. And they probably need the permission from the Interior Secretary as well, but the governor has to agree upon that. And other tribes in New Mexico do not want to see the Fort Sill Apache open up a casino there. But of course, the Fort Sill Apache, you know, that's where the Chiricahua Apache had been relocated following the surrender of Geronimo in 1886. So the Fort Sill Apache have a claim to this area, and they now have about 20 acres right there on Interstate 10 east of Deming.
We should also point out that the Joe Signs and the
Yes.
Chihini
Yep.
Apache are in the process of trying to get federal recognition for the Chiricahua as a separate tribe not affiliated with the Fort Sill Apache, because they do not consider the Fort Sill Apache to truly be the Chiricahua Apache.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a huge topic for another day. We have done previous webinars on that you can find on our YouTube channel. You might want to check out. But back to the subject of economics, you had brought up the possibilities of the Fort Sill Apaches opening a casino in the area. Now we all know those make money, they make jobs, and they also very, very, very much are part of that tour, or would be dependent on the tourism economy, as well as how much would that be locally draining to our economy, as far as possibly contributing to, you know, gambling problems and things like that. I have no research or no knowledge of how that has played out in other communities. But it would definitely be a stressor on the tourism industry. So here is a question going back to the presentation. Bart Roselli, that name sounds familiar. He wants to know if there were any negative responses from locals to the rise of incoming TB health seekers.
I do not know the answer to that question. Does anyone in this room know?
It seemed to be very promoted as a positive thing. Of course, you know, it was whoever was doing the writing for the newspaper, but it just seemed that there was, so it was something that a lot of pride was expressed in. They went to great efforts to market it elsewhere in the country, elsewhere in New Mexico. A lot of it was just sort of happening, and it took a while before sort of the negative aspects began to be discussed. For instance, very sick people who arrived without the means to support themselves, that became an issue. Later on, the contagiousness of TB became something that people were aware of, because at first the perception was TB wasn't contagious. But in fact, the locals went to great lengths to try to get national sanatoriums established here. There were these competitions throughout the West, and we were always trying to beat out Albuquerque. Eventually, we did get the National Methodist Sanatorium, but they just bought a pre-existing one, and that was kind of right at the end of the big wave.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. Back to the small businesses, Joyce Newman mentioned that casinos bring in only low-paying jobs. I don't know how, if people agree with that or not. I think fair or not, a lot of our businesses that, you know, do employ here are low-paying jobs, to be blunt. Anyone disagree with me on that? Feel free. But
I'll say that from that perspective, I won't I won't agree that they bring in low-paying jobs, and across the spectrum, I think primarily they're going to be the lower-paying jobs. But in the service industry, due to the services that they provide, those jobs can be, can pay pretty well ultimately. For example, when you have a dealer or, those people that pay that, work on tips, they have an hourly wage, but their tips far exceed what they're making per hour. But just the way things are working right now from the tribal nations, they're also working to make sure that their people are, able to have good, high quality, sustainable jobs with great levels of income. And so they're getting a lot better out there. But certainly it helps the economy. It helps the local community. It helps their tribal members. There's a lot of impact upside to bringing in a casino versus, not. And so I think I like to look at the upside better than just saying, no, it's probably not good because people will overspend, they'll gamble, they, will try to legislate their morality. But let's get them in, let's get the jobs, and let's get the economy going.
That's another great point. Everything has two sides, and I love that we're able to bring so many people here together to explore all of these different avenues, and it's all valid, and it's good to know. B. McKinney wants to mention that Joe Signs also does have a business as far as Wolf House Outfitters, and he does custom tours and eco tours and a variety of stuff. So that's sort of an example of utilizing both the tourism and the native and historical aspect and exporting that in a sense. And Doc says that to Bart's question, yes, that people here saw the influx of TB patients to the sanitariums as an economic boom. Doc is studies a lot of historical medicine and some other things, and so we love having her around the museum. Let's see, we have covered some amazing topics. Does anyone else have?
Now, Susan wants to say.
I just wondered if Lee would talk about her 5 points program.
Yes.
Which is something different than has been discussed so far, and it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Anybody?
I can do that if you like. The 5 points program began because we at SWNMAC received a USDA study asking us to decide whether or not we could use a business incubator here in Grant County. And in the course of trying to figure that out, we started traveling around the county and began noticing the number of historic buildings that exist in our county that are not being utilized. And so the concept of 5 points developed as an initiative to focus on a historic building in Hurley, in Baird, in Santa Clara, in Arenas Valley, and in Silver City, and to link the communities and the restoration of those buildings, the restoration of the history of those buildings, to link communities through a combined effort to pay attention and restore and reinvigorate those properties, and to connect them via walking and biking trails as well. And because the waterworks site was as far along as it was, we started there and have made incredible progress. Anyway, that's the idea of 5 points. It is an economic development driver initiative that hopes to link our communities through the economic development of historic properties. Does that help?
Alan says that he saw something about Montanita Credit Union creating a fund of loans to support local agriculture. Anything about that?
I know nothing about that.
Okay.
I'm not totally familiar with that, but I know we can probably get an answer on that through the Council of Governments.
Mm-hmm. So, Alan, if you want to email me, I'll pass that along. Marcia wants to know if downtown Silver was better off pre-Walmart or now with art and tourism as economic draws. So her question says downtown Silver City. What about Silver City in general? I don't know if we should, let's possibly expand on that question as well.
Well, I would say that, Walmart is obviously they're a giant store. Obviously they have a lot to offer, but Walmart isn't everything to everyone. And not everybody goes to Walmart for everything that they need. The local business owner, the small business owner who is at, the corner of Bullard and Broadway or out in the mining district someplace, can survive by providing a service either better than what Walmart can do in a certain niche, or in addition to what Walmart can do in a certain niche. Walmart has built themselves as a one-stop shop place for everything. And when I was a little kid, that was the mall. But there was still places where you could go around and get what you needed. Walmart is there, it's convenient, but it's not the end all be all for everyone. So my message, and this was a message given to me by my father-in-law, who was a small business owner all his career. If there's a niche that you can fill, you can compete with Walmart effectively. Just do what you do it to the best that you can, and make sure everybody in your community knows that you're there.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great statement to start wrapping up. We have run over by quite a bit, but I have no regrets. I want to thank everybody who has showed up to join this conversation and to take part. Thank you, Dr. Fritz. Thank you, George, Stephen, Lee, and our scholars. It's been a really great conversation. I've learned so much, both historically and about today, and I hope that people are able to keep talking about it. And we've got so many opportunities in this town and in this region to explore and to take advantage of, and just do our best. That's what we do as a town. Like Steve said, just be brave, be bold. It's never the perfect time, but it's always the right time. So thank you, everybody. And Clay Festival, woohoo! All right, thank you guys. Have a great day.